Christmas has always meant something special to me. Even after losing my husband so many years ago, I made sure to keep the traditions alive. For my son, Ethan, and later, for his family. I believe Christmas should feel like home, even if the world outside turned cold. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual. It was still dark out, just a faint blue tint in the sky. My little cottage, nestled on the edge of a quiet English village, smelled of cinnamon and clove. I had spent all of Christmas Eve baking gingerbread cookies from scratch, just like I used to when Ethan was a boy. I could still remember his tiny hands reaching for the warm cookies before they even cooled, giggling like it was the best part of the season. He used to say, "Mum, no Christmas is complete without your gingerbread men." So, I made extra this year. I even bought that silly little snowman plate he liked as a child from the attic and set it out on the table, right next to the hot chocolate mugs. I had wrapped all the presents carefully, hand-knitted scarves for the twins, a new leather wallet for Ethan, and a soft lavender shawl for Claire, my daughter-in-law. Nothing extravagant, just gifts from the heart. I even made a roast with all the trimmings, parsnips, Brussels sprouts, cranberry sauce, and a proper homemade gravy, just the way they liked it. Everything was ready by 11. They were supposed to arrive by noon, but noon came and went. I sat near the window, peeking out through the lace curtain, watching the frost glitter on the hedges. By 1 o'clock, I started to worry. I thought, maybe they'd had car trouble. Maybe one of the children wasn't feeling well. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No messages. At 1:30, I received a text from Claire. "Running late? Be there soon." No apology. No warmth. Just that. My stomach knotted a little. When they finally pulled into the driveway at almost 2:15, I was at the door, smiling. I tried to push the uneasy feeling away. "Merry Christmas," I said brightly as I opened the door wide. Ethan walked past me with barely a glance. "Hi, Mum," he mumbled, brushing a bit of snow from his jacket. Claire gave me one of her tight-lipped smiles and busied herself helping the twins out of the car. The children, Ellie and James, were the only ones who lit up when they saw me. They ran to hug me, and I held them close. For a brief moment, everything felt right again. Inside, I took their coats and led them to the dining room. The table was set with my best china, white with silver trim, and a red linen cloth that had belonged to my mother. Candles flickered gently on the table, and soft carols played in the background. "It looks nice," Claire said without looking at me. She seemed preoccupied, eyes scanning the room like she was checking for something. Ethan sat down heavily in the armchair by the fireplace, scrolling through his phone. I watched him from the corner of my eye, the way his jaw clenched. How he kept checking the time. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I tried to keep the mood light. "Who wants cocoa with marshmallows?" I asked, trying to sound cheerful. "I'll just take coffee," Ethan replied. "No sugar," Claire added, as if she couldn't bear to have a single sweet thing that day. I served them all and sat across from Ethan, carefully placing his mug on a coaster. "You all right, love?" I asked gently. He looked up, almost startled. "Yeah, fine, just tired. Long week." I smiled and nodded. "Well, you're home now?" He didn't reply. I watched the twins unwrap their little scarves with delight. Ellie twirled in hers like she was on a runway. James wrapped his around his neck 3 times and said he looked like Harry Potter. I laughed, truly laughed. And for a second, I thought maybe the day could be salvaged. But that feeling didn't last. As we moved into the dining room for lunch, Ethan remained silent, chewing slowly, barely speaking. Claire made small talk about work, how difficult it had been juggling everything at the law firm during the holidays. I listened and nodded politely, though I felt more and more like a stranger in my own home. They barely touched the roast. The kids played with their food. I noticed Ethan hadn't even tasted the cranberry sauce, the one he used to ask for every year. After dessert, which no one seemed to want, Ethan looked up and said, "Mum, can we talk for a minute? Just us?" I wiped my hands on a napkin, heart thumping. "Of course," I said, trying to smile. I followed him into the study, the same room where I used to read him bedtime stories when he was little. The fire crackled softly behind us. He stood near the bookshelf, arms crossed. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something," he began. "Claire and we've been thinking it's time for you to consider something more manageable, something smaller." I blinked. "Smaller?" "Yeah," he said. "Like a retirement flat or an assisted living place. Just somewhere that's more appropriate. This house is too much for you." My chest tightened. "Ethan, I'm fine here. I've managed this place alone for almost 2 decades. I love this house. It's our home." He sighed. "It's not practical, Mum. You're getting older. What if you fall? What if something happens?" "What's really going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why now? On Christmas of all days?" He didn't answer right away, just looked away, out the window. Then he said it. "We've already found a place. It's close to us. Claire signed the lease yesterday. We thought it would be easier if we just did it all at once. You can start moving next week." It felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. My hands trembled. "You want me to leave? Now?" I whispered. He shifted uncomfortably. "It's not like that. You'll have more support. You'll be safer." "No," I said, backing away slightly. "You don't mean safer. You mean out of your way." He said nothing. "I made you gingerbread cookies," I said quietly, as tears filled my eyes. "I set the table with the good china. I waited all day, Ethan." He looked ashamed for a second. Then the coldness returned. "I'm sorry, Mum, but this is for the best." I left the room in a daze. I looked around at the house. The family photos, the tree still glowing, the presents under it. I felt invisible, unwanted. And somewhere deep inside me, I knew. This wasn't sudden. This had been planned. I sat on the edge of the armchair in the living room, staring blankly at the fireplace. The flames danced gently, crackling, like they didn't know my heart was burning too. Outside, snow had started to fall, soft, delicate flakes landing on the garden path. I remember thinking how ironic it was that the world could look so peaceful while mine had just shattered. They were still in the dining room. I could hear hushed voices, Claire's sharp whispers, Ethan's firm but quiet replies. I knew what they were discussing. Me. Like I was a piece of furniture being moved. Like I didn't matter. A few moments later, they both walked into the room. Claire stood near the doorway, arms folded tightly across her chest. Ethan came and sat on the couch opposite me. His eyes didn't meet mine. "Mum," he began, in that same careful tone, the one people use when they're about to break bad news. "I didn't mean to spring this on you today. We were hoping to wait until the new year." "But you didn't," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "You brought it up on Christmas." He looked down at his hands. "I know, and I'm sorry, but this house, it's too much for you. It's old. It needs work. The stairs alone. I've lived here just fine." I interrupted, keeping my tone even. I've been fine since your father died. I manage. Claire finally spoke. It's not just about managing, Helen. It's about what's safe. Responsible. Responsible. That word made my skin crawl. I understand you both think you're doing what's right, I said, forcing myself to breathe slowly. But you went behind my back. You signed a lease, made decisions. You didn't even talk to me first. Ethan looked like he wanted to explain, but no words came. Claire stepped in again. It was meant to take pressure off you. The move will be easier this way. The new place is modern. 1 floor. It's got staff on call. You'll be around people your own age. I stood up slowly. My knees ached a little, more from tension than age. People my own age? I said with a small, incredulous laugh. What does that mean, Claire? That I should be warehoused somewhere because I don't fit your lifestyle anymore? No one is warehousing you, she said flatly. I turned to Ethan. Is this really what you want, son? For me to leave my home? The place where you were born? Where your father's ashes are buried in the garden? His face changed then. He winced. Mum, please don't make this harder than it has to be. I stared at him, not recognizing this man who used to bring me daisies from the yard and call me the best mum in the world. How had he become so cold? You've already made it hard, I whispered. The twins wandered into the room just then, oblivious. Ellie held a gingerbread cookie in one hand and asked, Grandma, can I take some of these home? I knelt down and smiled at her, heartbreaking. Of course, darling. Take as many as you like. They sat on the rug and started stacking cookies like blocks. Claire stepped forward, clearly irritated. We should go. It's getting late. She began gathering their coats and ushering the children. I watched them all shuffle about, cleaning up, packing presents, not saying much. The house suddenly felt like a shell. Their silence was the loudest thing I'd heard all day. As Ethan helped Claire zip up James's jacket, I stepped toward him and said, I won't fight you. If you've decided you don't want me here anymore, that's your decision. He looked at me startled. But you should know something, I continued. This house, it's still mine. You may think you're moving me out of it, but it doesn't belong to you. He frowned. What do you mean? I mean the deed is in my name. I never transferred ownership. I kept it. He looked stunned. But the will. You said... I said the house would be yours one day. Not today. Not like this. Claire stared at me, her mouth slightly open. I gave you my heart, Ethan, I said quietly. I gave you everything. I raised you on my own. And the one day we're meant to feel like family, you chose to treat me like an obligation. I just wanted what was best, he said. But the words rang hollow. For you, I said. Not for me. The air between us thickened. He looked like a boy again, caught, confused, unsure. As they walked out, I stood in the doorway. The same place I had once stood when Ethan left for university, waving with tears in my eyes. But this time I didn't wave. I just watched. The car disappeared down the snowy lane. I closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I spent the rest of that day alone. I sat at the table, drinking lukewarm tea, staring at the empty seats around me. The candles had burned low. The tree lights blinked gently. Unaware that the room they glowed in no longer held the same warmth, I thought of all the things I had done for Ethan. Working 2 jobs when his father died, staying up late to sew patches on his school uniforms, taking on small cleaning gigs in town just to afford his guitar lessons. And yet, When it came time for him to show me care, not even repay, just care, he didn't think twice about casting me aside. It would have broken me if I hadn't already let go. Because what Ethan didn't know, what no one in my family knew, was that I'd already made peace with the end. Not the end of life, but the end of clinging to what wasn't mine anymore. A month earlier, I'd finalized the paperwork. My estate, everything not tied to the house, had already been given to charity. I donated it in memory of my husband, to the hospice that cared for him, the orphanage we used to support, and a foundation for women rebuilding their lives after abuse, every penny. I had spent years collecting savings, investments, even the small jewelry left to me by my mother. I could have given it to Ethan, but I watched him grow colder year after year, greedier, more dismissive. I realized sadly that money would only deepen the wedge between us. He didn't need an inheritance. He needed a heart, and that was something I couldn't give him anymore. As I sat there alone, a strange thing happened. I felt calm. I felt free. Sometimes letting go is the only gift you can give yourself. It wasn't even nightfall when Ethan returned. The snow had thickened, dusting the path like icing on a cake I hadn't baked this year. Christmas had come and gone in a matter of heartbeats, not hours. I could hear the garage door open, the wheels crunching over snow. I stood in the hallway, still in the same soft grey cardigan I'd worn all morning, clutching a framed photo of Ethan as a toddler, barefoot, grinning, chocolate smeared across his chin. I ran my thumb gently over the glass. He had smiled so freely back then, so innocently. Then I heard the knock. Not the polite kind, not the tentative kind you use when visiting someone you love. It was firm, final. I opened the door to see him standing there, coat zipped to the neck, hands deep in his pockets, jaw clenched. "I booked the movers," he said. My heart skipped. "Movers?" He didn't answer directly. "We'll just pack the essentials. There's a small rental ready. It's clean. 1 floor, furnished. Claire's friend arranged it. You'll like it." "I didn't ask for this," I said softly, though I already knew the conversation was over. "I'm trying to make this easier for everyone. Mum." He called it easier, but nothing about this moment felt easy. I stepped aside as 2 strangers carried in flat boxes and packing tape, nodding politely as if I was simply changing apartments and not being exiled from the life I built with my own hands. I didn't protest. I didn't scream. Perhaps I should have. But when silence is all you've been met with for years, sometimes words seem pointless. They moved room to room, boxing up my life like it was just clutter. My sewing basket, the one I'd inherited from my mother. The old clock from my father's study. The mismatched Christmas ornaments Ethan made in primary school. They still hung from the tree, wobbling with every breath of air. Claire came down the stairs holding my photo albums. "These can go in the car with you," she said flatly, placing them in a reusable shopping bag, as though a lifetime of memories should sit between the spare umbrella and a bottle of water. I just nodded. The sun had started to set when they finished. The Christmas lights blinked behind me, soft red and green flashes in the window. Outside, the car engine hummed quietly, waiting. I stepped outside and felt the cold bite instantly. Ethan opened the trunk, gesturing toward my suitcase and the bag of albums. There wasn't much else. I turned back one last time, staring at the home I'd poured my soul into. The garden my husband and I planted every spring. The porch swing where I used to sip tea and read Jane Austen. The front door I'd opened thousands of times. always expecting love behind it. Not this time. As I climbed into the car, my grandson James pressed his small hands against the upstairs window. His little face was scrunched in confusion. "Where's Grandma going?" I imagined him asking. "Why does she look sad?" No one would answer him. Or worse, they would lie. The car door closed with a soft thunk, and then we were moving. We didn't speak. Not once during the 30-minute drive. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, hands fixed on 10 and 2, knuckles pale against the leather steering wheel. The dashboard glowed faintly. Christmas music played low on the radio, instrumental versions, stripped of words and warmth. How fitting. I stared out the window. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, landing on the windshield and melting into tiny rivers. Street lights passed us like ghosts, each one casting a brief glow on Ethan's face, making him look older than I remembered. I clutched my handbag tightly in my lap. Inside was my will, my donation letters, and a handwritten note addressed to Ethan that I hadn't yet decided if I'd ever give him. The road stretched ahead like a timeline I had no say in. I thought about everything I wouldn't say aloud. I thought about how, after his father passed, Ethan would cry in my lap for hours. How I would sing him lullabies even when he was far too old for them. How I held him close through every nightmare, through every scraped knee and broken heart. And now, he couldn't even bear to hold a conversation with me. A lump formed in my throat, but I wouldn't let it rise. I blinked slowly, forcing the tears to stay hidden. I had already cried enough. I wouldn't give this moment any more of my dignity. As the car turned into a quiet neighborhood I didn't recognize, Ethan finally broke the silence. "It's not permanent," he muttered. I didn't respond. I just thought, you'd be happier in a place with less to worry about. Still, I said nothing. Happiness, I wanted to say, doesn't come from square footage or service bells. It comes from love, from being wanted. And clearly I wasn't. We pulled into a small driveway. The building was neat, with clean lines and trimmed hedges. But it had no soul. It looked like the kind of place people were tucked away, out of sight. He opened the passenger door and helped me out, eyes avoiding mine the whole time. "I'll bring the rest up," he said. I walked slowly to the door, the cold biting through my shoes. A building manager met us inside, polite but distant. She handed me the keys, showed me the elevator, and spoke quickly about safety and schedule. I nodded along, not hearing a word. Ethan followed me into the small apartment. It was beige. That was the first thing I noticed. The kind of beige that didn't offend, but didn't comfort either. Just there. The furniture was sterile. Plastic flowers on the table. Magazines from last spring on the counter. A fake fireplace built into the wall. Ethan placed my suitcase by the sofa. "If you need anything, I won't," I replied quietly. He looked at me for the first time since the drive began. Really looked. There was something behind his eyes. A flicker of guilt, maybe. Or maybe it was just the reflection of the fluorescent light. "I'll come by next week," he offered. I nodded. But in my heart, I knew he wouldn't. He gave an awkward half smile and left, the door clicking softly shut behind him. And just like that, I was alone. Truly, completely alone. I stood there for several minutes, unsure of whether to sit, unpack, or cry. Instead, I walked to the window. The snow hadn't stopped. The street outside was quiet, untouched. It was Christmas night. No laughter, no lights, no warmth of family, just me. In a borrowed space, in borrowed time. I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, and opened my handbag. My fingers brushed over the envelopes again. Donation receipts, correspondence from the charities I'd supported. They had thanked me more in those letters than my son had in years. I pulled out the note I had written for Ethan weeks ago, folded neatly, cream-colored stationery with blue ink. My handwriting shaky but clear. It read, "If a love alone could have built your future, I would have laid every brick myself. But I see now that some things must be learned, not given. I hope someday you understand that you lost more than a house. You lost a mother's trust, and that is harder to rebuild than any wall." I stared at the letter, debating. Then I folded it back up, placed it inside a small box with a ribbon, and tucked it into a drawer. Maybe one day I'd give it to him. Maybe not. For now, I had given enough. The moment the door shut behind Ethan, silence pressed in like fog, thick and cold. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, still holding my handbag against my chest, the way you do when you're in a place that isn't yours. The apartment smelled of disinfectant and stale air, like a hotel that hadn't been touched in weeks. There was no ticking clock, no hum of family, no dog wagging its tail at the door. Just emptiness. I walked slowly to the window, tugged the curtain open, and looked out. Snow had started falling again, lightly this time. The flakes dancing under the amber glow of a nearby street lamp. Below, the parking lot stretched wide and deserted, interrupted only by Ethan's car reversing out, headlights sweeping over the building like a final goodbye. I waited until the red lights disappeared, then let the curtain fall back into place. There was nothing more to look for. I turned back toward the room. The living area and bedroom were separated by a half wall. A half-hearted attempt at giving someone privacy in a place meant for passing time, not building a life. The bed was neatly made. Hospital corners, starched sheets, not a single wrinkle. A bowl of artificial fruit sat on the kitchenette table, polished to perfection, but dead in every way that mattered. I unzipped my suitcase and pulled out only the essentials. 2 cardigans, a worn robe, my Bible, the framed photo of Ethan when he was 5. I placed it on the nightstand. It looked out of place, surrounded by unfamiliarity. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let my body rest. The mattress dipped beneath me, soft but unsupportive, just like Ethan had become. The silence clawed at my ears, and suddenly the weight of the day hit me. The tears, which had politely stayed away for hours, returned without invitation. Hot and fast they fell down my cheeks, wetting the collar of my cardigan. I didn't sob. I didn't wail. I simply cried the way a woman cries when she's finally alone. Without pride, without apology. I didn't know if I was grieving my home or my son or myself. Maybe all of it. My gaze drifted to the ceiling, then the far wall, and then to nothing at all. Because that's what I felt inside. Nothing. Until the memories came, as they always do in the quiet. At first, just flickers. Tiny, golden threads weaving through the ache. Ethan's first birthday. The way his tiny fists smashed into the cake, his giggle bouncing off the kitchen walls. His face had been covered in frosting, and I'd laughed until my stomach hurt. It had been just me and him then. His father had left when Ethan was barely 3 months old, but I never let him feel that absence. Not once. I remembered staying up late sewing a costume for his school play when he was 6. He'd wanted to be a knight. I didn't have money for fabric, so I repurposed an old curtain and used cardboard for his shield. He'd looked at me like I was magic. "Mum, you can make anything," he had said. I used to believe him. When Ethan was 13, he broke his arm during a football match. I'd run barefoot from the sidelines, not caring about the mud or the rain, just wanting to hold him. He'd cried into my jacket the whole ride to the hospital. I'd kissed the top of his head and whispered, "I've got you, always." I had meant it. Every word. Then came the harder years. University applications, bills, part-time jobs that drained me to the bone. I worked nights cleaning offices, my back aching, my hands raw, so he wouldn't have to take out a single loan. I wanted him to focus on becoming more than I ever was. More than a tired woman folding someone else's shirts. He graduated with honors. I still have the photo. Him in the black gown and cap, beaming with pride. And me beside him, looking exhausted but proud. That was the best day of my life. I didn't even sit during the ceremony, just stood at the back, clapping like my hands could power the world. Then came Claire. Sweet at first. Kind. Grateful. She'd call me mum and bake me pies. But over the years, her smiles faded. Her words sharpened. She became distant. Protective of Ethan in ways that didn't include me. I noticed the subtle shifts, the way she'd interrupt when I spoke, how she'd roll her eyes if I brought up old stories. Slowly, Ethan followed her lead. His visits became phone calls. Phone calls became texts. And eventually, even those became rare. I thought the house would anchor us. When I signed it over, it wasn't about the bricks or the garden or the mortgage I had finally paid off after 30 years. It was about giving my son stability, a place to raise James, a home filled with memories. My final gift to him. I never imagined I'd be exiled from it like a stranger. I never imagined Christmas would come without a single hug or a thank you. I reached for my tissue box, dabbing gently at my eyes. I felt tired, not just physically, but soul deep tired. I walked to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face, catching my reflection in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back. Her hair was thinning, her eyes red-rimmed, shoulders stooped, skin dull. But beneath all that, I saw her, a mother who had given everything and received silence in return. Back in the room, I picked up my Bible and opened it at random. Psalm 27 stared back at me. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. The verse was a balm to my heart, even though I didn't fully believe it in that moment. I whispered a prayer into the stillness. Not for Ethan, not for Claire, but for myself. That I would find the strength to rebuild a life, to find purpose outside of motherhood, to discover who I was when I wasn't sacrificing every piece of myself for someone else. I slipped under the stiff, unfamiliar sheets, the photo of little Ethan beside me. I would mourn tonight, but tomorrow, I would begin again, not for revenge, not for proving a point, but because I still had breath in my lungs. And maybe, just maybe, a new chapter waiting to be written. 2 mornings after the coldest Christmas of my life, I sat alone at the little round table in the corner of my temporary apartment. The sunlight tried its best to peek through the dusty blinds, casting strips of gold across the table. My tea had long gone cold, untouched. I wasn't hungry either, but I forced myself to peel a clementine. It felt symbolic. Something about its tiny segments, perfectly divided, reminded me that life comes in small, sometimes bitter, pieces too. And then I remembered the envelope. It was in my handbag, tucked deep in the inside zipper. A letter I had written to myself, or rather, for after me. I'd sealed it months ago, and though I wasn't sure why it was calling to me now, I stood and fetched it, my fingers brushing against its familiar edges. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy. My handwriting, bold and deliberate, read, "For when the time is right." I turned it over in my hands. The seal still held. I hadn't expected to open it until I was gone, until someone else would find it in a drawer and gasp at the contents. But something inside me stirred that morning, a quiet whisper that said now. So I broke the seal. The rustle of the thick paper sounded louder in the silence. I unfolded the document, and there it was, my will, finalized and notarized in quiet defiance nearly 8 months ago. I took a slow breath as my eyes moved over the pages. To my son, Ethan James Whitmore. There had been a different version of this once, one written in the hopeful ink of a mother who believed she would always be cherished. In that earlier version, Ethan was to inherit the house, the small savings account, the antique engagement ring from my own mother, even the insurance policy, modest as it was, with his name carefully printed beside the words beneficiary. But all of that had changed after one particular evening. It was spring. The trees had just started blooming again, and we'd gathered for dinner at my place. Ethan had brought Claire and little James, and I had made his favorite, chicken pot pie and apple crumble. Everything had gone well for a while. Laughter, stories, wine. Then came the topic of money. It started innocently. Claire had mentioned her friend whose mother had passed and left behind a sizable inheritance. They were building a new home now thanks to it. Ethan had chuckled and said, "Well, at least she left something useful. Some people just cling on to their stuff till they drop." He'd said it casually. No malice, no awareness of the sting it left behind. Claire laughed. "Don't worry, Ethan. Your mum's too sweet for that. You'll get the house. And the rest. Right, Mum?" I remember freezing in that moment. I was halfway through pouring gravy when the words sank in. "You'll get the house." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. An assumption. As if my life's sacrifices were just placeholders for their future gains. As if I were already a ghost at the table. I didn't say anything then. I smiled politely. But that night, after they left and the dishes sat in the sink untouched, I cried in my kitchen until sunrise. The next week, I visited my lawyer. "I want to change everything," I had said, eyes still swollen. "And I don't want anyone to know until I'm gone." I remember the way he looked at me, gentle but surprised. "Are you sure, Mrs. Whitmore?" I was. Absolutely. I'd already given Ethan more than enough. And I didn't want my memory to be reduced to dollar signs and property deeds. So I made the decision. The house went to a charity that provided transitional housing for single mothers. My savings went to a local scholarship fund for girls pursuing nursing, just like I had once tried to. My jewelry, modest but meaningful, was divided between 2 organizations that supported victims of domestic violence. I left a single handwritten note attached to the file. If love could be measured in money, I'd still be in debt to my son. But since it can't, I choose to pass it forward. Now, as I sat holding the open will in my hands, I felt something shift inside me. Not guilt, not regret, but freedom. Not revenge either. I didn't write that will to punish Ethan. I wrote it because somewhere along the way, I realized that being a mother didn't mean erasing myself entirely. I realized that I was still a person, with values, with choices, with a heart that needed healing. I placed the letter back in the envelope, folded neatly. I didn't seal it again. I didn't need to. I stood up, walked to the window again, and watched as the snow began to melt on the sidewalks below. The city stirred with life. People walking dogs. A mother dragging her son in a red plastic sled. Someone holding 2 cups of coffee with steam curling into the air. There was life out there. And I was still part of it. I thought of James, my grandson, his soft curls, his chubby hands, reaching for mine when he was just a baby. I wondered what kind of man he would grow into. Would he learn to love without expecting something in return? Would he grow up to remember his grandmother? Not the things she left behind, but the love she gave while she was still here. Time would tell. But as for me, in that tiny apartment with a second-hand bed and my own name stitched into the door, I smiled for the first time in days. Not a polite smile. Not the kind you force at family dinners or when someone says something unkind, but a quiet, peaceful smile that came from knowing I had taken control of my story. I may not have had a Christmas tree this year, or a family to sit around it, but I had peace. I had purpose. And sometimes that's a greater gift than any box under a tree. The days after Christmas were quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar. The city moved on quickly, as it always does. Decorations began to disappear from windows, and trees sat abandoned by the curb like forgotten guests. In my little apartment, the silence was thick, but not heavy. More like a pause, a breath after a storm. It was during one of those silent mornings that I found myself walking past a shelter near the edge of town. A small 2-story brick building with peeling paint and a hand-painted sign that read, Hope's Harbour. I had passed it dozens of times before and never really looked. But that morning, something about the place called to me. A group of women were gathered outside, waiting for the doors to open. Some held children. One woman had her arm wrapped around a teenage girl who looked like she hadn't slept in days. There was laughter too, despite it all. The kind of laughter that rises up from resilience, not circumstance. I stood there for a moment, just watching. And then, without quite meaning to, I walked inside. The lobby was warm. A little too warm, like they were overcompensating for the cold outside. A woman at the front desk looked up and smiled. "Can I help you?" I hesitated. "I'm not here for a bed. I was wondering if you need volunteers." She blinked, then smiled wider. "Always." That's how it started. At first, I just helped with serving meals. Nothing fancy. I'd put on gloves and an apron and stand in line with the others, ladling out soup or scooping mashed potatoes onto plates. People would come through the line, tired, hungry, grateful, and I'd smile and nod and say enjoy like it mattered. And strangely, it did matter. Not just to them, to me. Every thank you, every soft smile, every moment of human connection started sewing pieces of me back together. I hadn't realized how invisible I'd started to feel in my own life until I began to feel seen again by strangers. Over time, they gave me more to do. I helped organize donations, folded clothes, sorted toys for the kids. I even read bedtime stories in the children's room a few nights a week. The kids loved it. And I did too. Their small hands would tug at my sweater, and their eyes would light up when I gave them voices for the characters. It reminded me of when Ethan was little, back when he'd crawl into my lap and beg for just one more chapter. One little girl, Mia, reminded me so much of Ethan it hurt. Big eyes, messy curls, always full of questions. She clung to me from the first day, started calling me Miss Ellie, though I never told her my name. One night, after story time, she wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "I wish you were my grandma." I didn't know what to say, so I just held her. The volunteers became my second family. There was Janet, who had been volunteering for over 10 years since losing her husband. Frank, a retired postman who could name every kid by memory. And Sarah, the young director who had once lived in the shelter herself. She had the kind of heart you could feel before she even spoke. They didn't know my story at first. I didn't offer it, and they didn't pry. But little by little, in between sorting winter coats and serving Sunday dinners, I began to open up. It was Frank who said one day, while we were organizing canned goods, "You've been through something, haven't you?" I looked up from the shelf and nodded. "Haven't we all?" He smiled. "Yeah, but you carry yours like it's made of glass." That stuck with me. So I started journaling. At night, after the dishes were done and the lights were out, I'd sit by the little window in my apartment with a cup of tea and just write. Not for anyone else, just for me. Some days I wrote about Ethan, about the little boy he was, the man he became, the ache he left behind. Other days I wrote about the shelter, about Mia and the way her laughter could crack open the hardest parts of me, about the comfort of routine, the kindness of strangers, the rediscovery of myself. I started walking every morning too. At first, it was just to clear my head, but soon I looked forward to it. The sound of birds in the early hours, the stillness before the city woke up, the way the air bit my cheeks and reminded me I was still alive. There was a park a few blocks away, and I'd sit on a bench there, sometimes feeding squirrels, sometimes just watching the sky change colors. It was there, one frosty morning, that I ran into Margaret. She'd been my neighbor for over 20 years before I moved out of the house. We hadn't spoken much in recent years. Life had a way of pulling us apart. But she recognized me immediately. "Eleanor, is that you?" I turned, startled. "Margaret? Oh my goodness." We hugged, awkward and warm and long overdue. She was just the same. Fiery red coat, big glasses, the smell of lavender and peppermint clinging to her. We talked for over an hour that day. I told her everything, not because I planned to, but because I needed to, and because she didn't judge. By the time we parted, she had tears in her eyes. "You're stronger than anyone I know," she said. I didn't feel strong, not really, but I thanked her. Margaret started visiting me. We'd have tea and talk about old times, or sit in silence and let the comfort of shared space speak for us. She even came to the shelter once and helped sort baby clothes. The others adored her. Life was quiet, but it was real, genuine. And somewhere in the midst of that simplicity, I realized something. I wasn't broken. I wasn't discarded. I was healing piece by piece. I hadn't expected this life, but it was mine, and it was good. It was a Thursday afternoon when the phone rang. The sky outside my window was heavy with clouds, threatening snow. I had just made myself a cup of chamomile tea and was settling into my chair when I heard the sharp, insistent trill of my phone on the kitchen counter. I didn't rush to answer it. I rarely did these days. Most calls were from Margaret or someone from the shelter. But when I glanced at the screen and saw the name Ethan, my heart skipped a beat. It had been nearly 7 months since Christmas. 7 months since he had stood at the top of those stairs and told me, coldly and without hesitation, that I needed to leave his house. 7 months of silence. I stared at the screen as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times more. My hand trembled as I reached for it. I hesitated one last second, then answered. "Hello." There was a pause, a long one. Then his voice, tight, clipped, anxious. "Mum." I closed my eyes for a moment. That word, so small, so simple. was suddenly too loud in the quiet kitchen. Yes, Ethan, I said softly. We need to talk. My pulse quickened, but I kept my tone even. About what? He exhaled sharply. About the will. About the inheritance. There it was. No preamble. No apology. No, how have you been? Just straight to the reason he had called. I stood very still. My tea, forgotten, sat cooling on the counter. What about it? I asked. I got a call from your lawyer, he said. His assistant, actually. Said he's the executor of your estate, and that you had finalized everything a while ago. Yes, that's right. And he said you donated it, everything, to charity. My silence must have answered for me. What the hell, Mom? His voice broke. Why would you do that? I leaned against the counter. Because I wanted to. You gave it all away? He said, incredulous. Everything? The accounts, the bonds, the land? Why would you do that to me? His words hit like a slap. Not because they surprised me, but because I had once raised a little boy who thought of others first, who used to save half his candy for me, who would cry if he thought he hurt someone's feelings. And now he was just asking about what he didn't get. Ethan, I said, voice calm, quiet. You already did something far worse to me. There was silence on the other end. I could almost hear him blinking, almost feel the moment when the air shifted, and he realized this wasn't going to go the way he expected. You're talking about Christmas, he muttered. I'm talking, I said slowly, about the day you looked me in the eyes and told me to pack my things and leave the home I raised you in. You were standing in the same house where I used to read you bedtime stories and hold your hand when you had nightmares. And you stood there, like a landlord with no heart, and evicted me. That's not fair, he said sharply. You were being difficult. You were trying to control things. You made it hard for us. No, Ethan, I said. I was grieving. Your father had only been gone a year. I had no one. And I was trying to hold on to something that still felt like family. You wouldn't let us live our lives, he snapped. You always had opinions about how we were raising the kids or what we did with the money. Because I cared, I said, voice tightening. Because I loved you. And when your wife rolled her eyes at me behind my back or whispered about me in the next room, I still smiled and set the table for dinner. He didn't answer. I was going to give you everything, I said. You know that, don't you? I had planned to leave you the house, the accounts, the property upstate. Everything your father and I worked for. I didn't ask for. You didn't have to, I said, cutting him off. I gave it freely, out of love, and you threw me out like a stranger. There was a beat of silence before he said, quieter this time. I didn't think you'd actually leave. That's the problem, I whispered. You thought I'd take whatever you did to me. You thought love meant I'd always stay, no matter how you treated me. He didn't respond. I could hear his breathing now, faint, strained. You only called, I continued, because you found out there's nothing left for you to inherit. Not because you missed me. Not because you're sorry. That's not true, he said quickly. I didn't respond. I let the silence speak. Then more hesitantly, he asked, Is it really gone? All of it? Yes, I said. Every penny. The house, the savings, the land. It all went to women's shelters and education programs. To children who don't have a warm place to sleep. To girls who want to grow up and be something more than someone's wife. To people who need it. But you're my mother. I was, I said. And I still am. But I'm not your doormat. He flinched at that. I could hear it in the way his breath caught. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of a dog outside my window. "I didn't know it would come to this," he said finally. "Neither did I replied. "I just thought—" "I know what you thought," I said. "You thought I'd never leave, that no matter what, I'd always be there, that you could take and take, and I'd still show up with casseroles and birthday cards and hand-knit sweaters." Another pause. "I miss you," he said, barely above a whisper. A part of me softened instinctively, because even after everything, I was still his mother. But I also knew better now than to let a moment of emotion wash away 7 months of silence and years of taking me for granted. "I miss the boy you were," I said. "I miss who we used to be." He didn't reply. The wind whistled outside, brushing the windows like a warning. "You chose this, Ethan," I said. "And now I'm choosing peace. I thought the house would come back to me," he admitted. "That's why you called," I said. "Not to make amends, but to make a claim." Silence again. "You know where I am," I said. "If you ever want to talk, not about money, not about property, but about us, you know where to find me." He didn't answer, so I ended the call. I stood there for a long time after, staring at the phone in my hand, the screen now dark and silent. And then, slowly, I picked up my cup of tea. It had gone cold, but my heart had never been clearer. I didn't expect Ethan to call again. Honestly, I thought the silence after that first conversation would stretch into months, maybe even years. But 2 days later, the phone rang again. This time I was folding laundry, socks and sweaters that smelled of lavender, and I almost didn't answer. I just stood there, my hand hovering over the soft cotton of an old cardigan, heart thudding quietly in my chest. But curiosity, or maybe hope, won. I picked up the phone. His voice was softer this time, not desperate, just weary. "Mum," he said, "I've been thinking." I didn't respond right away. I waited, listening for the tone, the subtext. Was this going to be another plea for what he thought he was owed? Or something more? "I messed up," he said, almost in a whisper. "I know I did. On Christmas, when I told you to leave. I was angry. I felt like you were judging everything we did. I didn't know how to handle it. And instead of talking, I lashed out." I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, my knees suddenly too tired to hold me. "I've thought about what you said," he continued. "About love. About how I treated you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness right away. I want a chance to make it right." My throat tightened. For so long, I had dreamed of hearing those words. But now that they were here, spoken aloud, they didn't feel as triumphant as I imagined. They didn't erase the pain. They didn't undo the night I stood alone on the curb, suitcase in hand, while snow fell silently around me. "Ethan," I said gently, "do you understand why I gave everything away?" He hesitated. "I think I do. I didn't do it to punish you," I said. "I did it because I realized that holding on to things, property, money, memories, was hurting me more than helping. I needed to let go, and I wanted it to go to people who would never treat kindness like it was owed to them." He sighed heavily. "I know that must have been hard." "It wasn't," I said. "It was the easiest decision I've ever made. Hard was staying quiet while my son treated me like a burden. Hard was watching you become someone I didn't recognize. Giving it all away, that was freedom." He was quiet. I could hear the low hum of traffic in the background, maybe from his car. Maybe he'd pulled over somewhere just to make this call. "I never meant to make you feel like you didn't matter," he said. I thought the money, the house, everything would always be there. That you would always be there. That's the mistake so many people make, I said. They confuse unconditional love with unconditional tolerance. He let those words hang in the air for a moment. Then, can we try again? Start over, maybe? I don't expect anything from you. I just want to fix what I broke. A small part of me stirred at that. Not joy, not relief. Something quieter. A thread of warmth in the cold distance that had stretched between us. I still love you, Ethan, I said softly. That's never changed. But I've changed. I want to understand, he said. You don't need to understand everything right now, I said. You just need to mean what you say. I do. I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me. Then we start with something simple. You call. You visit. Not to ask for anything. Not to guilt me or talk about the past. Just to be here. Just to rebuild. I can do that, he said. And if someday, I added, we find that space between us has closed a little and trust begins to grow again, then maybe, just maybe, we'll be okay. He was quiet again. Then, with a voice almost childlike, he whispered, Thank you. Don't thank me yet, I said gently. This isn't forgiveness. This is a beginning. There was a pause. Then he asked, Do you hate me? I closed my eyes. The question was raw, vulnerable. The kind a son asks when he still sees a glimpse of the boy he used to be. No, I said. I could never hate you, but I did mourn you. For a long time. It felt like I lost you, even though you were still alive. I mourned you too, he admitted. But I was too proud to say it. Pride. It had always been our enemy, hadn't it? Pride had built the walls, fueled the silence, pushed us into corners we never meant to stand in. I'll always be your mother, I said. But I'm no longer the mother who stays quiet to keep the peace. I think I'm ready for that mother, he said with a shaky laugh. Even if she scares me a little. I chuckled lightly. Good. That means you're growing. We talked a little longer, nothing too deep. Just small things. The weather, the kids, what I was reading. He told me Emily had started therapy, and that he was considering going too. That was new. That was big. When we hung up, it was with no promises, no tearful goodbyes. Just a quiet kind of hope, soft and tentative. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the ache of absence in my chest. I didn't feel like a discarded relic of someone's past. I felt like a woman who had chosen herself. That night, I sat by the window and watched the snow fall. It reminded me of that Christmas night, how bitterly cold it had been, how small I'd felt standing on the front lawn with nowhere to go. But this time, I wasn't cold. I wasn't broken. This time, I was at peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because I no longer needed it to be. I had already given away my inheritance. Now I was reclaiming something far more valuable. My dignity, my voice, myself. And that was the greatest gift I could have ever given. To me. It had been a year since that cold Christmas night. The night I was sent away. A lot had changed in those 12 months. Life, though still unpredictable, had begun to find its rhythm again. It was a different kind of rhythm, slower, quieter, but one that resonated with something deep inside me. I wasn't the same woman I had been then, and I knew Ethan wasn't the same son either. This year, the house that had once felt so empty, so full of abandoned dreams, was now full of life in a different way. My new apartment wasn't large, but it was mine. I had downsized, yes, but I had also simplified. There were fewer things to fill the space, but the things I kept were meaningful. They told a story of the life I had lived, of a mother, a daughter, and now a woman who had learned to stand alone. As the days grew shorter, the familiar crispness of December crept in. It wasn't long before Christmas arrived again. This time there was no large family gathering, no extravagant meals or late-night laughter around the fireplace. But there was peace. Peace that came from acceptance, from understanding that Christmas, like life, didn't always need to be grand to be beautiful. I was decorating a tiny tree, a modest one, with simple ornaments I had picked up over the past year. The tree stood in the corner of my living room, bathed in the soft glow of white lights. Each ornament I hung held a memory. A silver star I had bought at the thrift store when I first moved in. A red velvet bow from a charity event I attended. A small hand-painted angel from the day I decided to give away the inheritance. As I placed the final ornament, I stepped back and surveyed the room. It felt right. There was no sadness, no weight hanging over me. Just a quiet, satisfied calm. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I quickly shuffled to the door. When I opened it, there stood a couple of volunteers from the local shelter, carrying bags of wrapped gifts. They smiled at me, their faces warm with the joy of the season. "We thought you might like to join us for a little Christmas cheer," said Miriam, a woman I'd met a few months ago when I volunteered at the shelter. Her hair was pulled back into a loose bun, and she had the kind of smile that made you feel instantly at ease. "Of course," I said, stepping aside to let them in. "I'd love to." The volunteers brought in a small table and set up a cozy little gathering in the corner of my living room. There was tea, hot cocoa, and even a few slices of cake. Laughter filled the room as the conversation shifted from one cheerful topic to another. I listened, happy to be part of this simple yet fulfilling moment. The room felt full in the way it hadn't for years. Full of light, full of love. Full of people who were, for the moment, a kind of family to me. At some point during the evening, a little girl, maybe 5 or 6, approached me shyly. Her wide eyes peeked up at me from behind a pile of blankets, and in her small hands she held a piece of construction paper. "I made this for you," she said, offering me the handmade ornament. It was simple. A glittery star with the words, "You are loved," written in crayon. Her handwriting was messy, but there was something so pure in the gesture that I felt a lump form in my throat. She had no idea who I was, or the weight of her words. I took the ornament, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over me. Not sadness, not regret. Just a deep, swelling thankfulness that I had finally found my way to this moment. This small, beautiful, imperfect moment. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "I'll hang this on my tree." She smiled and skipped away, her little feet tapping on the hardwood floor. The evening wore on, and the conversations grew quieter. I found myself lost in thought, gazing at the tree, the flickering lights casting shadows on the walls. The volunteers were cleaning up, ready to head back to the shelter to continue their work. But something inside me told me not to rush them. I wanted to savor this moment a little longer. "Are you okay?" Miriam asked gently, noticing me staring at the tree. "You look deep in thought." I nodded, smiling at her. "I'm more than okay. I'm grateful. For everything. Even for the hard parts." She didn't respond at first, as though she was weighing my words. Then, after a pause, she said, "I think you've been through a lot, and you're stronger for it. But I can see it. That peace in you. It's not the kind of peace that comes from everything being perfect. It's the kind that comes from knowing you've lived through the storm and you've come out the other side. I couldn't help but agree. There was peace in me, yes, but it wasn't the kind I had once imagined. It wasn't the kind I'd expected when I thought of perfect Christmases with my family. But it was enough. The volunteers finally took their leave, and I was left alone again in my little apartment. But this time, the silence wasn't oppressive. It wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of contentment. I looked over at the tiny tree once more, the glittering star catching the light. I thought of Ethan, how much he had changed over the past year, how our conversations had begun to feel real again. We weren't back to the way things used to be, but maybe, just maybe, we were getting there. Slowly, he had apologized, and though we had a long road ahead, I could see that he was trying to be a better son, trying to be a better person. I didn't need a grand family Christmas to feel whole. I didn't need gifts, or an extravagant dinner, or the things I once thought would fill the void in my heart. I had already given that away. I had given away the need for validation, for material things. What was left was so much more meaningful. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about the little girl's ornament. Her simple, beautiful words. You are loved. I wasn't sure if I had ever felt more loved than I did in that moment. By strangers, by volunteers, by those who had become my chosen family. I knew the road ahead would still have its bumps, its challenges, its heartaches. But for now, I was content, grateful, at peace. And that was enough. The soft glow of candlelight flickered in the corners of the room, casting a warm golden hue over the small but cozy apartment. It was Christmas night, and the quiet was comforting in a way I hadn't known before. The hustle and bustle of years past seemed like distant memories now. No longer did I feel the heavy weight of expectations or the ache of loneliness that had often gnawed at me during the holidays. This year was different. This year I had found something deeper. I sat by the window, looking out into the night. The streets were still, the world outside covered in a blanket of snow. In a way, it felt as though the whole world was asleep, tucked in for the night, wrapped in silence. It was peaceful, more peaceful than I could remember feeling in years. The journey I had gone through, losing so much and yet gaining something far more valuable, had changed me. It was as though I had stepped into a new chapter of my life, one that wasn't about holding on to things that could be taken away, but about embracing the things that could never be stolen. Love, peace, purpose, and dignity. I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. Ethan, the house, the inheritance, and the painful decision to let go of it all. I had given everything I had, not out of obligation or expectation, but out of a deep, quiet knowing that it was the right thing to do. In the beginning, I had struggled. There were nights when I lay awake, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake, if I had been foolish, or if I had simply been a fool to believe that love and family could survive on something as fragile as material wealth. But the truth, I realized, was that when we hold on to things that don't really matter, like possessions, money, and status, it keeps us from the things that do. We cling to these things, thinking they will bring us fulfillment, but they never do. The more we grasp, the emptier we feel. I thought back to the conversation I had with Miriam, the volunteer at the shelter a few weeks ago. Her words had struck me then, and they still resonated now. The peace that comes from knowing you've lived through the storm and come out the other side. That's exactly what this had been. a storm. But storms pass. And when they do, you're left with a clarity you didn't have before. It's not the kind of clarity that comes from making everything perfect. It's the kind that comes from letting go, from surrendering the need for control, and simply trusting the process. It's the kind of clarity that makes you realize once and for all that you were never alone. I thought about Ethan too. Our relationship had been strained, yes. It had been fractured by my decision to give away the inheritance. But in the end, it had also been healed by it. It was not the inheritance that mattered. Not the house. Not the things I'd given away. What mattered was the bond between us. The bond that had been tested, but ultimately remained unbroken. We were not perfect, but we were family. And sometimes that was enough. I didn't regret it. I didn't regret any of it. As I looked at the ornaments on the tree, the ones I'd carefully chosen and hung up myself, I smiled. Some were old, some were new, but all of them carried meaning. There was the angel from my childhood, a reminder of simpler times. The red velvet bow from the charity event that had sparked so many changes in my life. And the little glittery star from the girl at the shelter who had no idea how much her simple gift had meant to me. I had given so much away in the past year, but what I had received in return was far more precious than any inheritance, far more valuable than any house. The peace I felt now was the result of a choice I had made, a choice to live with integrity, to give freely, and to love without strings attached. It wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always comfortable, but it was honest. It was the kind of honesty that brings with it a quiet strength. A strength that comes not from holding tight to the things of this world, but from knowing that the things that truly matter cannot be taken from you. Sometimes we pour everything into people who only see us as a wallet, not a heart. But when you give from a place of love, not expectation, you'll never walk away empty-handed. I had walked away from a life filled with material things, and what I had found in return was a wealth I couldn't have imagined. I had found a love that didn't come with conditions. I had found peace, not just with Ethan, but with myself. I had found the freedom that comes from knowing that I am enough, just as I am. And as I sat there in the quiet of my living room, surrounded by the small reminders of all that had come before, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in years, I felt truly whole. There would always be challenges ahead. There would always be moments of doubt, moments when I questioned the path I had taken. But tonight, Christmas night, I knew I had made the right choice. I had given away the inheritance, yes, but I had gained something far more precious in return. With a deep breath, I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the snow was falling gently, covering the world in a soft white blanket. I could see the lights from the houses in the distance, twinkling like stars. And for the first time in a long time, I felt connected to the world around me. There was no more regret, no more wondering if I had done the wrong thing. I had made my peace. And now, I was ready for whatever came next. With a smile on my face and a heart full of hope, I whispered to myself, "It's going to be okay." The camera lingered on my face for a moment, capturing the soft glow of the candlelight and the quiet certainty in my eyes. The screen slowly faded to black, the last words echoing softly. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give is letting go. And in that moment, I knew I had finally found the peace I had been searching for all along.